Israel's latest offensive on the Gaza Strip reaches its 22nd day, the duration of its military operation in 2009. What's changed since then? That is, Israel's assault on Gaza unwinnable? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to Inside Story. I'm Adrian Finighan. After a night of relentless bombing, Palestinians woke up to the 22nd day of Israel's military campaign against the Gaza Strip. Both sides have been here before. Israel's Operation Cast Lead 5 years ago went on for the same length of time and killed around 1,400 Palestinians. As the number of people killed reaches a similar number in this conflict, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened to continue the operation until the mission is accomplished. He warned Israelis that they should be prepared for a prolonged campaign. The Israeli military says that it struck 150 targets overnight. They include an oil depot at the only power station still operating in Gaza. The attack is certain to increase electricity shortages even further. Even before the plant was hit, many people were only getting around 3 hours of power a day. Other targets included the home of a senior Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, and Gaza's finance ministry. The Israeli military says that 10 of its soldiers were killed on Monday, 5 of them after Palestinian fighters infiltrated the border through a tunnel. So it's been 5 years, but the pictures of destruction and despair in Gaza today look much the same as they did in 2009. We'll speak to our guests in just a moment about whether Israel is really able to win this conflict. But first, let's compare what's happening right now to Operation Cast Lead. Let's start with the objectives. In 2009, the Israeli government said that its aim was to restore security by stopping rocket and mortar fire from Gaza. Well, the aim of this current operation is basically the same. Israel says that it wants to restore quiet by destroying Hamas's infrastructure, which means rockets and tunnels. As for casualties, around 1,400 Palestinians were killed and 5,000 injured in 2009. The death toll now is rising all the time, but so far more than 1,100 Palestinians have been killed, a majority of them civilians, and some 6,700 have been injured. The Israeli death toll is different this time, though. 13 were killed back in 2009, 3 civilians, 6 soldiers, and 4 by friendly fire. But in this current offensive, 3 civilians have been killed and more than 50 soldiers have died. So does that perhaps suggest that Hamas is stronger than the last time? We can ask that question to the first of our guests today on Inside Story. From Jerusalem, we're joined by Yehuda Shaul, who served as an infantry combat soldier and commander in the Israeli army. And he's the founder of Breaking the Silence, an organization made up of former Israeli veterans that describe the realities of life in the occupied territories. Yehuda, drawing on your past experience, I want to start our discussion by getting your thoughts on Israel's current military strategy, its objectives in this campaign, and whether you think perhaps that strategy is effective.
Thanks for having me here. To say the truth, I can't really comment too much about what's going on today in Gaza because we don't have information from soldiers who are there now. It's going to take a few weeks after the operation will end, and we'll start to hear it, just like we heard after Operation Cast Lead 5 years ago. But there are things that are stated in upfront policies that are stated upfront by ministers and generals. And one of them, for example, is the new thing we have this operation, which I think is very problematic. This idea that you pick a house, and it's enough that it's a house of a Hamas activist, and you can call the family, notify them in advance that you're going to bomb the place, give them 10, 15, 20 minutes to leave, and then you basically blow up the building. It doesn't matter if they left or not. You know, this idea that because you gave the people warning over the phone, if they don't listen to your commands over the phone, it's a death penalty and you just blow the hell out of them. And that was not there 5 years ago. And I think in that sense, I can definitely see this deterioration where we had numerous operations in the past 10 years, but every operation we're crossing more and more red lines that we haven't crossed in the one before. And basically the next operation, sadly enough, starts where the moral low that we ended the present one. So we can really see this with time from one operation to the other. We're becoming more aggressive, accepting worse techniques.
Yuli Novak, a former Israeli Air Force officer, writing in the Guardian newspaper yesterday, said that she once firmly believed that the Israeli military was the most moral in the world, but not anymore, she said. Do you share that view?
Yuli is our executive director, and I think she's coming from the perspective of where we all come, which is, 2002, there was the bombing of Salah Shehadeh, one of the leaders of Hamas, and there was a bombing of his house, and 14 civilians were killed. And people were outraged in Israel. There were petitions. There were petitions to the High Court against this. Actually, the IDF, the Israeli military, was forced to open an investigation into that case. And what they found was that there was a mistake. So the house was bombed. Salah Shehadeh's house as a leader of Hamas was bombed. 14 civilians were killed. It was a mistake. Where we are today, 2014, 12 years after, we're bombing up houses. We just called them in advance and asked them to leave. But that's good enough. And the second part is there is no outrage. And I think that says very much about where we are as a society. After so many operations in Gaza, we become numb. We get used to the numbers, just like you basically compare the numbers. We forget that these are human beings.
Yeah. Is it just that you described it as the numbness? The Israeli military, of course, has always enjoyed huge support among the Israeli public. But where public opinion might once, as you said there, have held the military in check if civilians were killed in its operations, today that criticism is largely absent. Is it because Israeli society is just numb?
Yeah. I think, this is very sad to say. It's my society after all. This is my home and this is where I live. But it looks like that 47 years of occupation, ruling on other people, stripping them from their dignity and rights, 12 years of operations in Gaza, and even, 5, 6 operations after 2005, after the withdrawal of settlements from Gaza. And we're just, every time it goes by, we just tend to forget and we get used to it. We are in a place where we are not anymore able to show empathy to the other side and to see Palestinians as equal human beings to us. That's what happened to me as a soldier in the ground. I remember it, going into the first Palestinian house in the middle of the night and tearing apart the place, seeing the faces of the children, and doing it in the 10th time with not feeling anymore anything. And I think in a way what happened to me in a micro level is happening to our whole society.
What if the Israeli death toll continues to climb? Will that have any impact on Israeli public opinion, do you think?
I really hope that no one more will die here. This is heartbreaking and a tragedy to see these numbers of people who are losing their life. And I find it very difficult to talk about this issue in that context. I really hope that we're going to get our act together and demand a different policy, because this doesn't work. Going back to the question you asked in the beginning, look, we had Operation Warm Winter, we had summer rains, we had autumn clouds, we had cast sled, we had Pillar of Defense, we have this operation now. Where is this taking us? Just for the next operation, 2 years down the road, another death toll like this? I think we need to rethink our strategy and the way we deal with Palestinians, the way we deal with Gaza. This is not working.
Yehuda, it's been great to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Inside Story. OK, let's bring in the rest of our guests on today's Inside Story. From Jerusalem, we're joined by Yair Evron, who set up the Security Studies program at Tel Aviv University and is the author of the book Israel's Nuclear Dilemma. From Washington, D.C., Yousef Munayyer, who is the executive director of the Palestinian Center. And from Beirut, Elias Hanna, former military general and lecturer at the American University of Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Elias, I'm going to start with you. You heard what was being said just a moment or two ago. Israel's military strategy is not effective as history repeats itself again. Why aren't lessons being learned?
When you look at this cycle of violence, it's about no political solution in sight. Why? Because if you go to 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014, the whole geopolitical environment in the region really have changed and shifted. Why? Because you have nobody to call as a fireman for a political solution. In 2008, we had President Mubarak. In 2012, we had President Morsi. Now we have President Sisi, who is really proposed, like a ceasefire rejected by Hamas, and he is in a win-win situation because he doesn't like Hamas, no emotion for Hamas. So now, whom to call for this fire?
Okay.
What I want to say that it is not really in 2012 as of today, because the whole situation is different, because Hamas is fighting a war for political survival. It's not a war about measuring success or defeating Israel, neither from the other side that Israel is trying to defeat Hamas, because if it defeats Hamas, it loses, and if it stay not doing nothing, it really loses. So the situation is different.
The Israeli military calls itself the Israeli Defense Force. Can its current military operation and the tactics that it's using in this conflict be described as defensive?
Well, I think the strategic objective of the Israeli government has been from the beginning of the confrontation, of the current confrontation, has been to restore deterrence. I mean, Israel is interested in the status quo. I'm not going at the moment into the political context on which previous people have discussed. I'm talking about the more limited strategic objective. And the strategic objective of Israel, of the Israeli government, has been to restore a kind of a deterrence balance between Israel and Hamas. There are no further objectives beyond that. There are also tactical objectives, and that is to eliminate the tunnels, to hit as much as possible the rockets, the arsenal of rockets that the Hamas has. But there is no objective of trying to destroy Hamas altogether. And I agree with the previous speaker that, in fact, going into Gaza and taking over the Gaza Strip by the Israeli forces, something which Israel IDF, the Israeli army, could do within a few hours in terms of sheer military capabilities, would be, in fact, not cost-effective. In fact, political, strategic, and not strategic, but political, and in terms of casualties, it would be counterproductive. The Israeli main objective is rather limited.
Okay, Yousef Munayyer in Washington. Hamas was politically isolated, broke. It had been forced into an embarrassing unity deal before this war. Has Israel gifted the group a boost in popularity, do you think, revived its fortunes? And has the ferocity of its military campaign and the fact that so many ordinary civilians have been caught up in this revived the notion of resistance, do you think, in the Palestinian consciousness?
Well, let me just make a point on the previous discussion, which I think has been absent and also very important. There is simply no morality in a war whose repetition is already planned. And that is the fundamental problem here. States go to war when they're unable to resolve objectives by otherwise peaceful means. That's not the case here. Israel is going to war in the Gaza Strip as a matter of maintenance. This is how they refer to it, as mowing the lawn. But one, cannot mow the lawn while sowing seeds of hate at the same time. Time and again, we've seen that, as different restrictions are placed on the Gaza Strip, different tactics are then used by militants in the Gaza Strip to evade or get around those restrictions. When there were no walls around the Gaza Strip, the tactics were different. Once walls were put around the Gaza Strip, the tactics changed. Projectiles started being used to reach over them. Tunnels started being dug to get underneath them. So, this is not a problem that Israel is going to be able to solve with brute military force. Actually, quite the contrary, when it has engaged in conversations with the resistance factions on the ground through third parties to get ceasefires both in 2008 and 2012, that has done more to bring the Israelis closer to their strategic objective of providing security for their residents from rocket fire than anything else. But time and again, it's been the Israelis that have rattled these ceasefire agreements or broken them. So one has to wonder if war is in fact politics by other means, what is the political objective here? It's hard to see a political objective that advances peace, the only political objective that I could see is one that supports the efforts of right-wing parties inside, Israel to continue to solidify their electorate and position in future elections as well.
Okay. I want to pause at this point just to take a closer look at Hamas. The group was established in 1987, describing itself as a resistance movement, but it wasn't until 2006 that it was elected to power by the people of Gaza. Shortly after that, Israel imposed a blockade on the Strip. The US and European countries consider Hamas a terrorist organization. Before this latest offensive, the group was politically isolated, as we said, when an important ally, the former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, was deposed. And the group was bankrupt and losing popularity, unable to pay government wages and provide services. But many observers say that this offensive by Israel has boosted the group's popularity in the Gaza Strip. Yair Evron, is Israel fighting to manage the conflict with Hamas, or is it fighting for victory? Do you agree with what Yousef was just saying there, that there's something wider, there's a political agenda going on here?
I'm afraid not. In fact, I'm quite critical of my own government for not trying harder to achieve an overall political solution with the Palestinian community in the negotiations with President Abbas. I think it was a mistake on the part of Israel not to be more forthcoming in order to try to break the status quo and to create a new political atmosphere between Israel and the Palestinians, and as part of it, to accept the Arab League peace proposal. So in these terms, it seems to me that Israel made a mistake. However, as far as the Hamas is concerned, it seems to me that one has to remember, I think one has to understand the misgiving that many Israelis, including moderate Israelis, feel about the Hamas, because the Hamas, apart from being a national movement or a movement that is trying to achieve nationalist political objectives of the Palestinian people, it is also an ultra-religious fundamentalist party. It is part of an overall front, part of throughout the Middle East, of militant political Islam. And I think one has to be careful when one is thinking about the conditions and the demands that Hamas is posing.
Okay.
And it seems to me that
No, I just wanted to follow. We're desperately short of time, and I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier in your answer. Has this war weakened President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority? A brief answer, please.
No, I don't think it has weakened. It seems to me that, in fact, President Abbas has taken the initiative over the past week or more so. And as far as I know, current news, there is he's leading the overall Palestinian effort to achieve a ceasefire in Cairo. I mean, the negotiations are conducted now with Egypt.
Elias Hanna in Beirut, I know you want to come in there.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about deterrence, restoring deterrence for Israel, as far as we've known about the war of Israel, deterrence, when Israel goes to war, it's not because of the failure of deterrence, because deterrence or war is a part of the whole equation for Israel. Now, when we talk about war and politics between countries, between defined nation state, this war has a special character, a non-state actor that goes to war for political survival, where there is no political solution in sight. I mean, all we can reach in this kind of war, 2008, 2012, and 2014, is the ceasefire. We don't have any third party to go and interfere and say, this is the ceasefire. Israel today is trying to mowing.
So it's not. You were saying earlier on in the program that Israel is damned if it doesn't, damned if it doesn't. It can't win. I mean, neither side. From what you're saying, neither side can claim to have won when this conflict is over.
Yes, but today the tactic or the political or the strategic goal of Israel is to destroy the tunnels, and create like a buffer, as mowing the grass and waiting for the next round of this war. You know what I mean? So, but as far as you go inside, you have to fight different kind of warfare, urban warfare. And here comes the, you know, the death toll of the IDF soldiers. That's why we have seen so far more than 50. You know what I mean? So this one is different from the Kastlad. It's different from the previous one in 2008.
Yair Evron, you wanted to respond.
Oh, I just would like to add that indeed, I mean, maintaining the status quo, stability, is not changing the political context. Obviously, in order to change the political context, first of all, you have to create a period of pause. You have to create some stable context within which one can start working on the political dimension of the conflict. And it seems to me that once we get a ceasefire initiated by Egypt, the United States, the Palestinian Authority and so on, and other actors, once we have such a ceasefire, within the period of ceasefire, one has to start negotiating on the overall political situation and also about the real economic grievances that the people in Gaza suffer. And it seems to me that there is an opening there for much greater economic freedom of movement and so on of the Gazan people.
But yeah, Yousef Munayyer in Washington is, I mean, yes, talking about perhaps Egypt brokering a ceasefire. Will Hamas consider Egypt a fair broker?
Well, one of the major problems here, and this is important because this idea of building, you know, on ceasefires to advance, you know, political objectives and the political situation forward. One of the biggest challenges with ceasefires in the past that have largely worked, at least in terms of Palestinians holding their fire. The biggest challenge has been, you know, holding the Israelis to account for their commitments in those agreements. In 2008, the ceasefire agreement called on the Israelis to ease restrictions on the Gaza Strip, but that was never done in any meaningful way. The same goes with 2012. When the fire from the Palestinian side stops, the siege does not. And the reason for that is this underlying political game that is being played, this notion of needing to bolster the moderates and marginalize the so-called extremists between, you know, Fatah and Hamas, because, you know, they do not want to hand Hamas a quote-unquote political victory by relieving the restrictions on the Gaza Strip, which are collectively punishing 1.8 million people. But there's something quite perverse in locking yourself into a situation where ending the collective punishment of 1.8 million people is a reward to Hamas. I think this entire sort of dynamic needs to be exposed for the failure that it is and changed in a really significant way for there to be any success on the political front.
Yousef, do you think that Hamas will ultimately get its demands?
You know, time will tell. I think that the sentiment among Palestinians is that far too much Palestinian life has been lost to go back to the status quo. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are rejecting what they see as a false choice between dying slowly and dying quickly, either under a punishing siege or under the conditions of resistance to that siege, which brings about, of course, this massive Israeli bombardment and massively disproportionate death toll as well. So I think people do not want to see a return to that. And just one last point, since so much of this conversation focuses on Hamas, this Israel-Hamas dichotomy is really inaccurate. The number of belligerents on the ground in the Gaza Strip are far more diverse than Hamas. They span the Palestinian political spectrum from Islamists to nationalists to leftists as well. The resistance in the Gaza Strip to the Israeli siege and to the occupation is one that I think broadly represents the will of all Palestinian people, not just a certain segment of it.
Yousef, many thanks indeed. Gentlemen, I'm afraid there we will have to end our discussion. Thank you very much indeed to Yehuda Shaul, who joined us earlier in the program, as well as to Yair Evron in Jerusalem, Yousef Munayyer in Washington, D.C., and Elias Hanna in Beirut. And thank you for watching. Don't forget you can leave us your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story on Twitter. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finighan. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.